Hi, everyone. Happy Friday to you. Welcome to this edition of EducAsian Livestream series presented by the Asian Community Development Council. Happy to have you all today. Today's kind of a national kind of day of healing, right? Following all the incidents that have been happening across the country, but especially we're talking about the incidents, cases of violence and racism targeting the Asian American, Pacific Islander community, targeting people, that population here in this country. A lot of people talking about it, a lot of people being affected by this and feeling all kinds of feelings, right? Going around with it, whether or not you've been a direct victim of this or you've heard of friends or families who have been targeted by this. This is something that we want to talk about. We want to have this open space so that we can have this conversation. And part of this conversation is with a board certified psychologist, our special guest today, Dr. Huong Diep, who is joining us here from San Diego. Dr. Diep, nice to have you with us. And we're having you from San Diego, but you actually work with patients here in Nevada as well, right?
Yes, I do. And thank you so much for having me. And yes, so my name is Dr. Huong Diep, but the way you can pronounce it in Vietnamese for our Vietnamese listeners is Buxi, Huong Diep. I'm based here in California, but given the need for additional AAPI psychologists, I think I saw that need when people were reaching out to me, and especially with my specialty, which is working with LGBTQ youth. So really working with that intersection of the AAPI, the BIPOC communities, and the queer communities, that I also then got licensed in Nevada so that I can provide additional services as well.
And I think that's great because, we're just looking through different resources, especially with the ACDC staff and volunteers, just looking for resources for mental health, especially dealing in the space that we're dealing with right now. And there's just not that many, right? I mean, that's kind of the issue that we're dealing with.
Definitely. I mean, it's really sad how few Asian American or Asian identified mental health therapists there are. And again, that's a whole other story about why, that is. But I think that is something that I know for a lot of folks, that the reason maybe why they haven't sought out therapy is because a lack of culturally informed providers, or providers who can, who look like them and who understand their experience, and that there's certain things they're not going to have to, explain. And so I think that's what I have seen in terms of my clinical work, is for so many patients just being so appreciative that they're don't have to explain certain things, about their backgrounds and about their culture, and to have somebody who not only has the clinical experience, but some of the lived experiences as well, right? Even though we know that the AAPI community is so varied and beautiful in its unique tapestry. And so we all have our own experiences, but nonetheless, to have just that basic understanding and sort of some of the cultural values, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important that we're trying to seek out, faces like yours, people who've gone through different experiences, to share, especially what's been going on around the country. And that's the point of this conversation, with people trying to heal and trying to move forward, but also trying to kind of fight back against this. But I think one of the ways that we want to deal with this is, seeing the big picture of how this is all impacting our mental health. Right? I mean, we're talking about racist incidents that are happening maybe to people we know, and the violence we're seeing, just with that shooting. I think, I don't know, we're calling that just kind of the breaking point for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, seeing that shooting in Atlanta that killed 6 Asian Americans, women who were killed. Talk to us about what's happening to us right now in terms of mental health, just seeing and hearing all these things.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's, and I think even for myself, I recognize that even though I'm a trained mental health professional, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm a human being that's also going through all this during a pandemic, and definitely feeling, for, the lives that are lost in Atlanta, the increase in AAPI hate during the last year. But again, this isn't a new thing, right? I think this is just, there was a tipping point that has happened that, thank goodness there's an amplification of voices right now in terms of the spotlight, on the community. But I think what I'm seeing in my clinical practice and just in talks and talking to the community and talking to other AAPI, therapists and community members or whatnot, I think I'm just hearing a lot of fear. I think fear of and anger and sadness. And I think this idea too of a little bit of deception and disappointment, and the idea that I think for a lot of folks, and again, I can't speak on behalf of all AAPI folks, but just from what I've heard is that this belief that we've all indoctrinated within ourselves, or maybe especially for second generation folks, that their parents who immigrated here in hopes of a better future, and saying, well, we're going to work really hard and we're going to put our heads down and we're just going to stay quiet so that we can be successful, right? And that for their next generation of kids, that they won't have to maybe work as hard. But I think what a lot of people are realizing is that was a lie. Like, just keep working harder or putting our heads down and being quiet. That has not, worked, or that is not working. And so I think it's just a myriad of feelings that are happening. And then we layer on that the pandemic and social distancing, and that we haven't perhaps been able to grieve and mourn and process in the ways that our community is used to, whether that, is through gathering and sharing food and storytelling or music or, whatever it is that feels like healing, right? And that I always say too, healing looks so different within, different cultures and families and whatnot, but it definitely does. It is very difficult, right now. So I think if that's a message that I hope that listeners and viewers can leave with, is just to know that you're not alone and that this is a very, very difficult time. And so if you do find yourself crying, or needing extra naps or not wanting to talk to anybody, this is all, I just want to validate that we are all having a very normal reaction to a very abnormal event.
Yeah, you brought up the fear, and I've lived in this country for over 25 years. And I would say this is probably one of the first times that where I'm thinking, hey, if I go out there, am I going to face that kind of, racist incidents or violence targeting towards me, which I've never really felt before, So I think we're reaching that time where it's really important for anyone, no matter how strong you think you are, that if you need the help, that it's out there. But I think one of the interesting things about the Asian American community is that, this kind of cultural, how we're thinking that we don't seek out help, because that is showing that we're not strong, right? And I think that's part of the culture that we grew up with. Is that what kind of you saw in your experience as well?
Definitely in my personal experience, yes. I think, my parents were immigrants here from Vietnam. They came here in 1980 to California. And I think that they came with, the ideas of, working hard and really putting your head down and staying quiet and being strong, right? And that this idea of stoicism and that sort of this fear and potential stigma of quote unquote airing your dirty laundry or whatnot, right? And that I think that's something I've seen across, the board. I think the younger generations, which gives me a lot of hope, they're changing in terms of being very open, more open to talking about mental health. But unfortunately, there is still such a stigma to seeking, mental health support. And I know I personally and experienced that 15 years ago when I went to see a therapist, for the first time. And I remember I was very embarrassed to admit, and this was before I became a psychologist, to see, a therapist. And I didn't tell my parents because they wouldn't have understood, just growing up, at least in my family, my culture, that to see a mental health therapist or a psychologist would mean you were crazy. I mean, even if we look at linguistically, I don't know about, I know that you speak Thai and, our other listeners, but in Vietnamese, there's really not even kind of a PC word for mental health. Like, I mean, either, I remember growing up, they, my parents, and again, with their knowledge, right, they called people like "kom," which means just crazy. And so I think I had this idea that, oh my gosh, if I were to go to see somebody or talk to somebody, then I must, be crazy. But obviously, and I think what I've been very passionate about is through my own experience, and this is why I became a psychologist, was to amplify the voices and to reduce and erase stigma for seeking support, especially for, our marginalized communities.
And I think, right now we're talking about, people being attacked for different things. We're talking about from COVID-19 since last year, people having that discrimination against a certain population, maybe hearing people call it the Chinese virus and having that racism from that side. And now, just discrimination just seems like it's almost senseless, especially those physical violence against our elderly population. So how do you deal with that fear? We're talking about the fear, the worries, all these, tough things that we're going through, and we don't have access to that mental health professional. What are some of the things that we can do right now to kind of go through this process in the most healing way?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we do know that there are a lot of different barriers to seeking, mental health, whether that's, from stigma or just accessibility, finances, whatnot. And so I think what I would first just say is to take a deep breath. It sounds so cliche, but really, and breathing and grounding ourselves, that we can activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming nervous system. Because right now we've all been sort of working from our nervous system that is more the fight or flight or freeze. And so part of this is again, obviously, if there is a safety concern, to seek of not feeling safe in one's own home or community or house, or whatnot, that in terms of getting, immediate, support. But I think if one does feel safe, but it's more not feeling safe in their own body, or and leaving, and what you said of going aside to go to the grocery store, I think part of this is let's not gaslight ourselves either. I feel like so often, we're being gaslit from others, and in terms of thinking that you shouldn't feel that way, or judging ourselves for the way that we feel. And so I think part of one of the first things I always recommend is really just validating just our own experiences and where we are. And then that if you're feeling scared, let's just name it for what it is. Like, I am scared, instead of judging ourselves for feeling scared, because that's just going to add another layer, of our own oppression, to ourselves and to the community. So I think in terms of, really grounding and breathing and feeling safe. And then I think I come from a very strengths-based perspective. So usually when I work with clients, I ask them, well, what have you done in the past during difficult times that have helped you, get through difficult times? I really come from a resilience-based model, so a strengths-based model, instead of looking at struggles as like pathology, or whatnot. And so usually, and then I think folks really, they're like, oh yeah, well, when I went through this is what I did. And yeah, I can do this. And again, I also want to reiterate that there's only so much coping and resiliency that we can do, because if the structure and the system is still broken, we're still trying to strengthen ourselves within a broken system. And so I think it's that balance of also acknowledging that we are trying to almost swim upstream in this situation sometimes. And so maybe sometimes taking a break and, getting out of the stream, and whether that means saying no to any additional responsibilities, or if you can, and to, I think, really honor just wherever you are in your experience right now, and that all the feelings are valid, and again, because I think that, not to make a blanket statement, because I hate making blanket statements, but I think that for with my work with AAPI communities, what a lot of folks say is just, I was never taught how to feel my feelings. I was never taught that feelings were important, and that it was a lot of repression, which I think part of it is honoring that for maybe some families that was a way of survival. Right. But that maybe for right now, that repression is just further perpetuating the pain.
And, I think this is important. We saw this, there's actually a website, stopaaphate.org, where people can go right now and share their experiences, where, we're welcoming people to do that as well. And what's the importance of that? Talk to us a little bit about being able to share, and maybe just reaching out to people in your network. I know ACDC is trying to offer some local resources on the website so that people can find, people who look like them, who are in this community, but as you said, it can be hard to find. But just that process of reaching out, even on social media, which can be, not so good for you in many ways. But I think people are doing that now, to at least saying something on social media and saying, hey, help is out there. We can talk about it. We can share our stories. So I think that's important too, right?
Definitely. And again, I think going back to your first question, why it's important is because we don't want to feel alone. I mean, I think we're all going through so much, and that what makes it even worse, what makes a traumatic experience even worse, is when we feel that we're in it alone and that we don't have any allies. And so I think part of this is reaching out, to whether it's folks within the AAPI community, or I know there's folks outside of that want to be allies. And I think part of this too is really owning up to, hey, here's what I need. Here's what I would like. Please, can you check up on me? Can you, read this article? Can you inform yourself? Can you donate? Because I think what I'm seeing too and hearing too is that people do want to support and help. They're just so afraid of saying the wrong things. And so then it results in not saying anything at all, which then further isolates, the folks, the AAPI like folks. And so I think in terms of, where, and again, for some folks, maybe they feel comfortable sharing on social media or on different platforms or anonymously, or whatnot. There's different healing spaces that are happening, online, now that are being led by AAPI like moderators. And, I can share some of those links afterwards. And, but I think too of just who's already your support, who's already, your community, because I think oftentimes we're all so busy kind of running around doing our things that I think until I know that even for myself as a mental health therapist, until somebody's like, hey, like, and again, it also puts the burden on them, but just letting me know, hey, I am kind of struggling right now. Can you kind of check up on me? And then I'm like, oh, okay, definitely. I can definitely, do that. But oftentimes we're so afraid of doing the wrong things that it just results in this immobilization and paralysis where it ultimately hurts, others.
Because you may not be able to say, hey, I know how you feel because you're not in that group, right? But then we can always say, what can I do? I may not fully understand what you're going through, but I want to do it for you, right?
Exactly. And it's like that, and I can share the link too. It's like the Brene Brown. She has this great, I don't know if you've seen it, but she has this great cartoon about the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Right.
And I can share it, but basically, sympathy is more that pity, right? That like, oh, I'm sorry. And at least, it's like those at least comments or but, or just, the unhelpful things. Empathy, right, is really sort of having to tap in, even if you're not part of the AAPI community, even if, you haven't experienced hate crimes, but it's tapping into like a pain, a place, a painful place that, I think we've all, as a part of being a human being, we've all experienced one time or another, to hold that space and to be like, oh, okay, this, I know what that feels like. And then to be able to hold that space for another, because even as a psychologist, there's no magical words that I can say that takes away someone's pain. But what oftentimes that my clients tell me is that I hold space for their pain. And that I validate their pain and that I see them for who they are and don't judge them, for their experiences. And so I think if that's, what I could, suggest to whether those who are allies or wanting to support others, it's really, even saying, hey, I don't really know what to say right now, but just know I'm here.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think you said, hearing it from people who look like them is so important, right? Because you really kind of understand your background, where you came from, why you're acting a certain way, why you're feeling a certain way. And, that's why, you said there are groups even for psychologists, right, who are reaching out AAPI. And I know as journalists, there are groups of journalists who are coming together and say, hey, we are going through this too, as journalists, as psychologists, as other professionals. So, and what are some of the signs that we're looking for? I mean, I know, like you said, some people just trying to work so much and trying to be in denial what's happening, but we're bombarded by this. Are there things that we should be looking for? Things that, maybe changes in ourselves or our families, especially if people have kids and teenagers, maybe a lot with teenagers, right? And they see a lot of things like, I heard a comment, I think on social media not too long ago, hey, for parents to say, watch what's on TikTok, because, they see a lot of like violent messages against elderly Asians on TikTok, which I had no idea. I don't have kids, but people who have kids may have to go through something like that, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I work with a lot of kids and youth, and what I've been, working with the parents, and I've been sending out emails to the parents too, kind of checking in and asking them to check in with their kids, because especially for younger kids, they're not going to perhaps have the vocabulary, right, to say, hey, I am scared because of the recent events. It is more perhaps you're seeing any changes in sleeping, any changes, in their eating patterns, any behavioral outbursts that's a significant change from where they used to be, because oftentimes kids don't have the vocabulary yet to express their emotions. So then they will act out as a way of relieving any stress or anxieties, that they're feeling. So I think a lot of times parents are like, wow, why are my kids, acting out more during this time? And so then we kind of peel back the layers, be like, okay, well, that's their way of sort of expressing some of the fear. Because I know that for some of my AAPI students, especially as schools are opening up, again, for in-person, that they're really afraid to go back to in-person schooling. So, they tell me like, Dr. Depp, like, what if the kids don't wear masks, or, the kids have made fun of me for, saying that my family brought in the virus, or that, of saying like, oh my God, just really horrible comments of, those old Asian ladies deserve. I mean, it's atrocious. And so I think that, and you can only imagine as adults, we're having a hard time managing, all this. And so to be a child or a teenager with going through all their other developmental and hormonal changes, that just adds in an additional layer. And then especially, I just want to plug, especially for, my LGBTQ youth, knowing that that's going to be an additional, layer as well. And that oftentimes for those youth, they really feel like they're a minority within a minority, and that they're extra targeted. So I would just say, again, I don't want to raise alarm bells and say, oh, keep your kids at home, don't let them out. No, not at all, because kids do need to socialize and they need to get back in community. But maybe it is of slowly having that conversation, with them, and in an appropriate way to be like, hey, what are you seeing in the news? Like, what do you think about, things that are going on? Because trust, they have opinions about what's going on. So,
yeah. And we see so much of this. And what do you think about just limiting time on social media, limiting time watching the news? I mean, do you think that helps or hurt? Because we do see positive, stories out there trying to get people to amplify this message or get help, but at the same time, is it too much? And is that affecting our mental health in some ways too?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, research showed after the incidents of 9/11 that every time we watched the news and saw the towers falling again, our brains don't know that that was just a news clip. So it almost felt like we were reliving the trauma. So we're constantly re-traumatizing ourselves. And so I believe it's the same where in a way it's great, and that I am guilty of sometimes doom scrolling myself, but knowing that there is a limit sometimes to be like, wow, I'm feeling, especially my body, really tight and I'm not breathing. And so I think part of this is, yes, and especially for our young people, and I know it's hard when they're at home and they're like, this is my only contact with the world, but part of this is maybe limiting it and just being like, well, and then I ask questions like, what do you think you're going to find out? Or what do you think, what new information do you think you're going to, get to? And part of that is then what I hear from my youth is, well, I just want to connect. I want to hear that another person's going through something like this too. So it's that connection, it's that validation, it's that being seen. So then I work with them to be like, okay, so thank you for helping me understand that this is what you need. So then how can we help you get that connection through community, through, different clubs and groups and whatnot, but not just through, scrolling.
Yeah. And, if they're watching us on social right now, this is one of the good things we're trying to put out there as on ACDC Facebook page, if you're just joining us here, we welcome your questions and comments. Obviously, we'll be watching this after 2, but we're talking with Dr. Huong Diep, who is joining us. And she also works with patients both in California and here in Nevada. And we wanted to share your website as well. We have some more information if you want to find out about Dr. Diep and her work. She's a board certified psychologist, and you specialize, I think, global mental health, right? You work with culturally insensitive, trauma-informed kind of model. But I think the core of your work here is to, you said, build on that resiliency and strength and being strong, even though we're talking about, hey, we got to get out there all of our feelings. But at the end of the day, we want people to be able to push through this because, like anything, this is what we go through. And this is the reality. I think a lot of people maybe try to block it out or say, this is not really happening. It's not affecting me. But you tell me, I mean, this is not how you deal with situations like this.
Yes, I think I have been guilty because of my upbringing of sort of just putting my head down and blocking out feelings. But I think part of this is in learning and then becoming a psychologist is that really the only way out is through. It really is feeling those dang feelings and holding space for them because they want to be heard, right? I think anger is a signpost that our boundary has been violated. So anger isn't bad in itself. The emotion isn't bad. It's the behaviors that come from it, right? Whether if you punch a wall or you kick somebody, right? So like when I work with parents, I'm like, okay, anger in itself isn't bad. It's there's no such thing as a bad emotion. It's the behaviors that result from the feelings. So then part of this is identifying the core feelings and that anger, all these feelings are just signposts to something that is going on in our lives. So anger that feeling is a signpost that a boundary has been violated. Sadness is a signpost that we've lost something, right? And I think too, I really help folks. And that's why I talk about grounding and meditation and breathing as a really good coping strategy, because so much of anger and sadness and these emotions are felt first in our body or simultaneously in our bodies. But oftentimes we're so disconnected from our bodies because we're so, in our heads that we don't even know we're holding, right? Because I'm sure, I don't know about you, but like by the end of the day, my shoulders are like up to my ears, right? And I'm like, all right, this isn't how it's supposed to be. So really kind of tapping in and tuning in and noticing, I'm like, all right, like for me, I feel anger in my belly. So my belly has been on fire, the last, week and a half or, however long it's been a while. And so I think using that.
Right. And it's just interesting you brought that up about how the physical effects of the stress and the fear and the worries and the anger. Sometimes you don't realize. I was like, oh, wait, what is my body going through? But that's one way of it telling you that there's something wrong.
Definitely. And so what I see too, I think that brings a good point for a lot of the AAPI communities and just communities of color ends up being a very psychosomatized thing where they'll come into their medical providers complaining of some chronic stomach pain. And then, that they will run all the tests and there's no cause for the pain. And so again, this is where then folks will erroneously be like, oh my gosh, I feel like crazy. I'm going crazy or something. But part of this is if you can know that, you're not going crazy. Your body is trying to send you a message to be like, hey, slow down. Like a boundary has been violated. You are not feeling safe, right? And if we look at Maslow's hierarchy, if you've seen that, we have to have our basic needs and we have to feel safe in order to ascend to the other levels to become the best versions of ourselves. But if I'm not feeling safe, I'm not going to be able to show up to the world, to be the best version of me.
Yeah. And this is just not you. I mean, if you're a family and you're a parent and you're trying to take care of your family as well, it's double, right? You're trying to take care of yourself and you're trying to take care of people in your family as well. But I think that's a really good point you brought up because, the physical symptoms we're feeling, sometimes that's directly connected to our mental health. And we're not thinking about that. And like you said, like an organization like ACDC, for example, I just want to put it out there, their website, acdcnv.org. I know they're trying to, provide as many local resources, no matter how little that is. But I think that's important, like you said, to have someone that look like you, but also speak your language. Because I know you speak Spanish, but also conversational Vietnamese and that importance of the language barrier, because, a lot of people don't feel comfortable maybe even leaving their community to get help, right? They want someone that they can talk to, that they feel like just kind of on their side.
Definitely. And I think that's another barrier if we're talking about perhaps why there isn't enough or sufficient mental health providers, out there. It is potentially the linguistic barrier as well. And we know that there are medical and mental health interpreters out there, but it just is another barrier, right? And that if a person is already not feeling comfortable to go see a mental health provider, you can only imagine then having somebody else in the room, the physical room, if this was in a, pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
But then I know for a lot of folks, they have said, well, I don't want, because I can speak, like I think we talked about, I can speak Vietnamese in terms of conversationally, but to do the medical and mental health jargon, I don't feel quite as competent. And so I don't want to potentially hurt somebody by something that I say. So oftentimes I'll have somebody in the room, because at least I can understand everything, but they can help me with some of the more medical jargon. But then even for some of those clients, the stigma of like, well, I don't want somebody else in the community who potentially, you know, I'm going to see in the grocery store later or something like that to in the room as well. So that might be another barrier, even though we'll go over confidentiality, you know, and all that stuff, that again, the limits of confidentiality of mental health, and that everything is, you know, confidential with a few, you know, certain limits. So.
Yeah, it's such a big topic. And I want to put up your website too here so that our viewers can go there for more information and learn more about you. And I know you talk about all kinds of mental health issues and you have patients dealing with a lot. I want to hear a little bit about your book, though, because you did just come out with a book.
Yeah, thank you.
On something that we say, you know, that affects a lot of Asian American, especially women. It's something that people can really get more resources, you know, from what you wrote about.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the book is here. It's called All the Love, Healing Your Heart and Finding Meaning After Pregnancy Loss. And it was just released this week. And so that's why it's been a very bittersweet week, because I'm so proud of this book. And I'm speaking on behalf of, you know, the intersectionality of women of color and especially queer families. But it's also been hard to celebrate with everything going on. But I think definitely the additional stigma of seeking support after pregnancy loss, that is something that not a lot of people recognize that they can gain support for, because unfortunately there's another layer of stigma, you know, for that, and the questions of what did I do wrong, like you know, did I not pray enough, or was it because I ate this, or was it because I exercised, or you know, whatever it is. But it's so much of this self-flagellation and beating ourselves up for things. And so with my co-authors, it's a part memoir, part therapy. So it's my co-author Kim Hooper speaks about it from her personal experiences. And then I, along with Meredith, we speak about it from the mental health perspective. So again, going back to some of our earlier topics of that, maybe this book, you know, could be a way that if you can't get into therapy or you're not ready for therapy yet, that it's broken down where there are different chapters for different situations. And then it talks about the personal experience. And then I bring in the therapeutic lens and different practical tools to support.
And I think that's so important, just to talk about the different experiences we go through as an AAPI community. You know, we talk about racism and violence, and, you know, pregnancy loss is one. I mean, there's so many issues, and it shows that we're not just kind of, I mean, I think the problem is people see it as one group, right? We have one problem, one, you know, lens that they're seeing us through. But, you know, people from different backgrounds have different issues that they've dealt with, different experiences they've gone through. And I think understanding that and having people see us through that light, that we're all different, and we see things differently, we feel things differently. I think that's kind of a good start.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I think I'm always very cautious to be like, hey, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, my experiences, because I remember in graduate school, I really didn't like it when and this was, you know, before a lot of more culturally informed care was supported, was that, oh, Huong, can you share with us your experience or speak on behalf of the AAPI community? And I would just be like, I can't, like, I'll share with you my personal Vietnamese American background and my experience growing up in my particular family, and the stigma of mental health within my own family, but, you know, again, not representative of the beautiful tapestry, right, of the AAPI community and the strength and the fortitude of the community. So
having you on the show today is great, just to show, you know, another face who's out there, who's, you know, you're trying to help and support the community, but at the same time, you've been through those experiences as well, and coming from your own background, and, you know, what I've gone through, other people who are watching this. And I think it's great to have this collective space for us to talk, but to understand they all come from so many different, you know, backgrounds. And I think that's important. Any last word that you wanted to put out there, just in light of everything that's happened, you know, all your clients that you're working with and people in your community, what's kind of like, you know, that kind of something for us to be hopeful about, because I'm sure there are, you know, and I think one of the things is just no matter how bad, things have been, I think it's in some way we needed to talk about this. This needed to come out, no matter how traumatic that experience was.
Mhm.
But what is your way of looking forward and say, hey, we can still be strong and resilient despite all of this?
Definitely. I think what I have a lot of hope, for is just our youth. I'm amazed at how strong and powerful and outspoken, the next generation, is, and how much they're willing to talk about mental health and struggles, and, how they're able to use, different platforms, to do that. And I think of seeing, especially amongst my clients, and that just the community in general, just this desire to wake up and to see things, very differently. And so I think for me, that gives me, a lot of hope and a lot of motivation, to keep doing, the work, that I'm doing, because I do see change, and I am able to have, those difficult conversations, with white allies as well, that of really thinking like, how can I help? How can they help, support? And so I do think momentum is headed, in the right direction. Do we still have a ways to go? Yes, but I do believe deep down that we are headed in the right direction.
Well, that's hopeful to hear. And we thank you so much for being on the show with us today and sharing your thoughts and information, and just kind of putting the face out there that there's help out there, and if we want more information, you can go to her website, and we'll put that up for people to see. Again, your website, and also for the ACDC website. And we're hoping to get as much more local resources to get, to help people, not just meeting the basic needs. As you said, we need to meet those first, and then go next level to get that mental health resources out there, especially during these difficult times that we're going through. But a lot of hope as well, as you said, Dr. Diep. So thank you so much for joining us today, and take good care of yourself. Stay well and stay safe. And for everybody watching as well, stay well, help each other, speak out for each other, and keep on inspiring each other. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Education.